Afternoon. I was brought up in above Springfield on a property called Benmore. It was at early days. It was a high country station, but with tenure review and catchment board run plans and selling land to dock, it sort of became a hill country foothills property in the end. But I farmed in partnership with my parents for a number of years, and in about 1997, 98, Cece and I took over the management of that property. And at one stage we just sort of ran it on our own without staff, but we ended up with a policy of having young boys. They'd come and go, and different skill fits and quality, and some of them were drinkers and some of them were sleepers, and different skills. Anyhow, in fact, we had one that the father actually paid me to employ him, so he paid his wages and he got fed and watered in a house, but you get what you pay for, I can assure you. So anyhow, we sold Benmore in 2007, but 16 months before that we needed a staff member, another shepherd and staff member, and along came this athletic young lady with a clear head, bright young thing she was in those days, still is today, and her name was Sarah O'Connell, who's our facilitator here today. So we had 16 months up until the time we sold Benmore with Sarah, and she was a great support. So today and yesterday are payback time, and I'm happy to repay, because you were great support to us on that period. So anyhow, in 2007 we sold the family property and headed across to Ashley Gorge Station. We leased that for 2 years. It was a place to give us somewhere to put our stock. We had sheep and cattle studs and things at that stage, so we wanted to hang on to those. While we thought about our next direction, being on a property all your life, you're sort of in a bit of a cocoon. You sort of don't know what's actually out there until you go and have a look. So it gave us 2 years to look at everything from businesses, chicken farms in the North Island, farms in the South Island. We even went to Australia. We looked at businesses in the city. We sort of wanted a combination of land plus maybe a business. We wanted something extra other than just a sheep and beef operation and deer operation we'd been running. So that was pretty hard to find, and I was actually keen on going to North Island. My wife Cece was from the Rangitikei area, and they're hill country farmers. I thought this would be easier. North Island had always appealed to me. The land prices per stock unit was a bit cheaper, so you got more stock units for your money. We went and looked around and saw other Cece's family up there, and looked at properties and other properties for sale. And then Cece came to me and said, "I actually don't want to be a North Islander anymore. I'm actually a South Islander." So that was the end of that story. So we sort of looked at other things, and then in 2009 I came home from the Canterbury show, which we as a family have been involved with for a number of years, and as I'd done for many years before that, looked at the real estate, and there was flagpole for sale. I knew at that minute I was going to buy a flagpole. I just had that feeling. So anyhow, I'm telling you about the journey of flagpoles. So we the beauty of being cashed up, you could make a cash offer, and it wasn't too difficult to get in there. So, but before, the thing that did interest me that had the extra other than the sheep and beef was these trees, and everybody was the vendors, the agents said, "Well, the trees are they have no timber value, had really no value," and I thought, "Well, surely not. This can't be right." And so anyhow, I rang. I thought about it on some of the other farms I looked at. There'd been carbon farming with mainly indigenous forests. I've seen farms which sort of knew a wee bit about the ETS scheme and forestry and as part of that, but I couldn't get excited about the cutting the trees down and then having to pay this liability. I really just couldn't get my head around that. So I rang. I thought about, well, why can't I have an exotic forest that just goes on growing forever and you just don't cut it down? And so I rang the guy in MPI, and he was very helpful. He said, no, you can do that. That's no problem, but as long as you don't cut it down or it doesn't fall down. If it falls down, you'll have to replant it. So I reinforced this. I thought I'd better talk to a few other people. So I rang Mark Belton, whose name was showing up in a few things, and he said, "No, I can't talk to you. I'm working for another client on that same property." So I rang another guy, Vern Harris from Blenheim, I'd seen his name on a brochure. I didn't know about this gentleman who just spoke before me before, but I may have talked to him. But anyhow, Vern told me the same story, and he had a meeting with him. We didn't even come onto the property. We just talked about it, and he said, no, you can do all those things. So we bought the property, and the autumn of, it must have been 2010. 2010 we arrived at Flagpole. It was 1,300 hectares. It had 560 hectares in tussock grassland and 220 hectares in pasture and 520 hectares in trees. The trees, 70 hectares of that was in Douglas fir, and the balance was in Pinus radiata. So that's what we bought it off the Selwyn Plantation Board. At that stage, they were getting rid of their assets, and Flagpole was one of the first ones. It's just going back a stage before that. In 1993, the Plantation Board had bought 1,050 hectares of that property, the hill country, and they didn't actually start planting until 2000. The problem there being that they planted a lot of forests in this foothills area, and the locals were sort of starting to get a bit annoyed about this just blanket planting. So they had struggled to get a consent to plant. It actually ended up. A few more photos there.
Put the next big arrow down.
Oh, that one there. Oh, that's a bit of flagpole there. So they struggled. That ended up in the Environment Court, and the net result was that of that 1,050 hectares, they only ended up with 560 hectares planted. So today we've actually added to Flagpole. We bought another property in the Russell's Flat area, so we've now got about 25 hectares, and you see the stock number. We've got about 4,500 odd stock units running between the two places. We opted to go, after discussion with various people, to go into the Permanent Forest Sink Initiative, which is the PFSI, and all after we bought the property. Mark Belton, he offered the same opinion. He said, "No, I think that's the correct thing to do." Vern Harris suggested it, and so that's where we ended up. So basically, basically, it's in permanency. It's for 50 years, as we've talked about before. So anyhow, by the end of 2010, we'd registered the forest, and we had at that stage we had 3 years worth of carbon sitting. Well, by the time we had a sale pending, which was going to be delivering on the 22nd of February 2011, and we had 3 years worth of carbon to sell. This sale was going to be my biggest cheque I'd ever received, other than selling the property Benmore, so I was quite excited. So on the morning of 2011, 22nd of February 2011, I was all quite excited that today was payday. I headed back over to our lease farm over at Lees Valley to bring a mob of sheep back from the Middle Bridge. If some of you are familiar with that Lees Valley road, it's a pretty sort of windy, sort of narrow road, so off we went. Halfway through that road, the grounds moved. The road was like being on a swing bridge, and I was concerned about the rocks that might fall on top of us, but we had no problems really. As we got back into cell phone coverage, all was revealed that was the mighty Christchurch Earthquakes. So I wasn't thinking about my cheque at that stage. I was wondering where my children were, who were all in Christchurch at schools at that stage. So they all arrived home with various people who were homeless at that stage. And yes, we all have a story about what happened on where you were on the day of the Christchurch earthquakes. So anyhow, that night I happened to be watching the television after we'd all settled down, and there before my eyes was Mark and Ollie Belton. Mark and Ollie Belton had got involved at this stage with marketing the carbon, and so I had started a relationship with them. To my horror, I looked on the TV that night, and here was Mark and Ollie's office, the old arts centre building, completely wrecked, and I thought, holy hell, that's Mark and Ollie. I hope they're not dead. And then holy hell, they've got my bloody contract sitting there. This is going to be our biggest payday. So, but all was well. And fortunately, they were stuck in that. They were stuck in the office for quite some time. They had time to get all their gear organised, and by the next day, I had my paycheck. So that was So that was a bit of relief. So anyhow, that was that end. As that year, I decided I'd sell all that carbon. And Ollie said, "Would you want to sell a lot?" I said, "Yes." I could just see that things weren't looking too good on the carbon market. It was all totally political, as it's always been. And by the end of that year, the whole thing had collapsed and had gone to $1.50. So at least we'd had our first cut out of that. The sale at that stage was based on tables, not on measurement. So the tables were actually quite a bit under when we did finally go to measure the forests. So it collapsed in 2011. It quietly sort of started to rise again in 2015 when they made the emitters, when they started cutting the foreign bogus credits. The emitters couldn't buy those, and so this price just quietly increased and quietly increased. At that stage you could bank them, because you get them allocated every year, and so what you do is you just bank them. That's one advantage. So we moved on to measurement, and we were actually pleasantly surprised with how much carbon was there, including the Douglas firs. We're now sequestering about 50 tonnes per hectare per year, which is quite significant, really, and it works out at about, on the $25, about $12.50 per hectare per year, and as opposed to our sheep and beef operation. Working on that particular land, I sort of think it's probably about 3 stock units per hectare on the same land as where the trees are. You're probably looking at $350 a hectare at a gross, and we all know the costs of running a sheep and beef operation. Whereas with my carbon business, that's a minimal cost. We pay insurance every year. I maintain the tracks just so we can get access through it, and so there's a little bit of cost there, a bit of spraying for weeds and things, but really once this forest is set up for the permanent forest scheme, it's very, very minimal costs. So the other thing on that, you can actually bank those credits for a number of years. You don't have to sell them. You only get taxed on the income when you do sell them, so you're not getting taxed on the carbon credits you've got sitting in the bank. So that's a bit of a plus. There's a few more photos, I suppose. That's just a few shots of that's off the top of Flagpole looking down over the Canterbury Plains. When you look up there, all you see is dairy factories, the Fonterra one on the left, and now out the other side, and the Sinlay, on a hazy day, that's all you ever see. Then looking across to Mount Oxford on the top photo there, and just a photo of of our trees in the gorge there. It's sort of, with the way they, it's actually quite well structured. It's not like a plantation forest. It's sort of got bits of native area left, and so it just sort of blends in quite well to the landscape, really. So it suits being a PFSI forest. Then it opens up into some tussock land, and yeah, so we keep it grazed to keep the fire risk down, and so it's running up to fairly high altitude. The Douglas firs are on the highest parts, and they struggle. It is quite high up there, so it's up to sort of 700 metres there where those trees are planted. So they do struggle, and yeah, they've had a few hiccups over the years with stock and that when they were first growing them. So they had a bit of a knock back in the early stages. What else have we got there? Let's throw a few more photos. Yeah, that's the Douglas firs there. You can see they're significantly behind the pines. The country is. I've looked at a number of blocks around New Zealand over the years, in the last 2 years, and I keep coming back to Flagpole as being a good place to grow trees. It's got a reasonable moderate rainfall. The ground is good for holding those big trees when they do start to get very big, and I just keep thinking, well, it is a good forest land. What else have we got there? A few more shots there, and that's sort of just our home paddocks and a few of our cattle and things there. I feel it's quite a good tool for succession. All forestry is good for that, but I think even the carbon side of it is good as well. But you can sort of have you can, if you had family coming in, if you wanted an income, you'd have income for all through your retirement without affecting the rest of the property. And it's also another way if you're buying other blocks. As we know, it's quite difficult managing another farm from in a different area. But if you have got a forestry block, the management of that is very simple, and so you can have investments for different family members or different people's needs, and the family farm can carry on as it's doing, and maybe be an income to that family member as time goes on. I did mention I forgot to mention their other property, which is 10 k's away on Bluff Road in Russell's Flat. We bought that 3 years ago. It's coming up now, I suppose, as time goes on. So we planted that out. 130 hectares of the Gorsey higher parts, we planted them out. I haven't got any shots of that. And we've left about 80, 90 hectares of the better land for grazing, because it's a short distance to walk them through from that property. So it's a pretty brief sort of. The other thing is the banks. I have struggled with banks. I've sort of seen investments there I'd like to purchase, but they won't bank me on the strength of my income from carbon credits, which is taking a bit of time to change their thinking. But hopefully, if we can get forward contracts, they may be a bit more interested in being part of that discussion and part of that investment. So. But no, they are a bit of a struggle. They like the idea of carbon credits. They like the income from it, but they're just not prepared to put their money where their mouth is at this stage. So, in summary, 15 years ago, I couldn't believe that one day my major part of my income would come from selling a product that I couldn't touch, I couldn't feel, I couldn't eat it. Couldn't taste it. It didn't bite me when I was in the dairy yards. It didn't kick, and I wasn't bruised and battered after I'd been in a day in the yards. And best of all, there was no dagging. We all know about dagging. That's sort of the most downside of sheep farming. So all those things have gone, and no freight. It's just a computer sort of on a phone call or a computer. So it's a very, very simple farming system, really. So. But I'm of the view of what the government is as well. I mean, the poor government's been taking a bit of flack over the a lot of areas of land being totally planted out, but it's not really there. What the thing I hosted the $1 billion, the launch of the $1 billion tree planting program, and the message came from there that it's the right tree for the right place, and they don't want to have good land put into trees, and I'm of the same view as well. It's we don't know I didn't know 15 years ago that my income would be from that. We don't know what the future of our good land's going to be, so we've just got to once it's in trees, it's always going to be in trees, and you can't go back on, especially on hill country. So I think that's all I've got to say, really. We don't have a good afternoon.